Hello and welcome to the day ahead. It's Monday, June 29. I'm your host, Juliette Zali. The local market is set to open higher by around 0.2%. Traders hopeful the start of a new financial year will spur gains across the ASX. There are reports this morning Iran and the US have agreed to halt recent strikes in the Gulf and renew their peace talks. Axios is reporting the two sides plan to meet Tuesday in Qatar. A return to diplomacy would follow several days of strikes and counter-strikes since an Iranian projectile hit a cargo vessel in the Strait of Hormuz on Thursday, with both the US and Iran accusing the other of breaking an interim ceasefire that was agreed to on the 17th of June. Short-dated US Treasury yields fell on Friday, tracking lower oil prices after crude shipments through the Strait of Hormuz rose to their highest level since the US-Israeli war with Iran began, fueling hopes that the worst of the recent inflation shock may be passing. The two-year note, which typically moves in step with Fed interest rate expectations, dropped to 4.086%, the lowest since the 17th of June, and the yield on benchmark 10-year notes fell to 4.371%. The dollar fell for a second straight session as recent economic data and a drop in oil prices slightly cooled expectations for a Fed Reserve rate hike, although the yen remains in territory that leaves it primed for an intervention, the Aussie dollar at 69 US cents. Well, the S&P 500 ended marginally lower on Friday with a steep drop in AI-related chip stocks and sharp gains in Moderna and other healthcare stocks. The S&P 500 declined pretty flat there to end at 7,354 points. And the Nasdaq was down by 0.25%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average also flat. Now for the week, the S&P 500 fell 2%. The Nasdaq was down more than 4.5%. And the chip index lost 8% for the week, its worst weekly drop since April. 8 of the 11 S&P 500 sector indexes declined, led by industrials and also materials. Apple rallied and partly rebounded from Thursday's sell-off when it raised iPad and MacBook prices, blaming soaring memory and storage chip costs. Moderna surged almost 13% to its highest level since 2024 after the drug developer hosted an investor event and showcased its pipeline. And a report that OpenAI is considering delaying its public debut until next year weighed on risk sentiment related to AI stocks. But shares of SpaceX edged up slightly before closing down 1/3%. Passively managed index funds need to buy billions of dollars worth of the stock ahead of its inclusion in Russell indexes. And ON Semiconductor dropped almost 24% after agreeing to acquire Synaptics in an all-stock deal valued at around $7 billion. Synaptics shares were down by about 4%. In commodities, crude prices fell more than 3% on Friday as oil tankers kept exiting the Strait of Hormuz, easing supply concerns the day after a cargo vessel was hit near Oman. Brent crude was down by more than 4%, while we saw WTI finish down about 3.75% to below $70 a barrel. Gold rose as the dollar weakened and expectations of rate hikes eased slightly following the inflation data, but prices still on track for a fourth consecutive weekly decline. Copper shrugged off an early dip to trade higher as a weaker dollar and lower inventories countered a sell-off stemming from equity markets, but remained on track for a weekly decline. And Bitcoin has dropped below 60,000 US dollars. It is now 52% off its all-time high. Locally this week, Tuesday brings RBA's June meeting minutes along with private sector credit data, followed by Wednesday's commodity prices and May building approvals. On Thursday, the trade balance data is set to be released. Looking overseas, BOE's Governor Bailey takes the stage along with Fed Chair Warsh at the ECB Forum on Central Banking, and June manufacturing PMI is set to be released on Thursday, while May jolts data and June unemployment get handed down later in the week. That does it for the day ahead. I'm Juliette Zali. We'll see you tomorrow.